This happened a few months ago, back in the spring. It was that strange in-between period of my life. Just graduated, no real responsibilities yet, and way too much free time. I'd finished school a semester early, which seemed like a great idea when I was drowning in assignments, but once I actually had all this free time, I had no clue what to do with it. My full-time job wasn't starting until June, and most of my friends were still busy with classes or finals, so until then, I was just floating, feeling like I was stuck in the gap between two phases of my life. It was actually really discomforting and made me feel worthless. I'm someone who always needs to be doing something productive, so just sitting around for days on end watching time pass was killing me. That's probably why I said yes when my mom asked me to check on my Uncle Rick's beach house. It was an easy favor: drive down to Rehoboth Beach, make sure nothing was leaking or damaged, and do some small maintenance to save Rick the cost of hiring someone. Oh yeah, I should probably mention that I'm from Pennsylvania and Rick's house is in Delaware, so the drive's not so bad, just a little over 2 hours. The house is massive, the kind that comfortably holds my entire extended family every summer. 25 of us packed into one place, playing games and drinking too much. Those two activities are honestly the only distinctive things about our family. This house isn't exactly on the shoreline, but it's not too far from the beach either. It's nestled in a quieter neighborhood lined with tall beach grass and winding roads. Fast forward to some random day of the week that I honestly can't even remember. I think it was like a Thursday or something. I left in the late afternoon, which in hindsight was probably a dumb idea. The drive was pretty chill. When I got to the house, everything seemed normal. I made my way inside and ran through Rick's checklist. I checked the faucets, the breakers, and walked the property. Everything looked fine. To be completely frank, it felt strange being there alone. I'd never seen that house without miscellaneous board games sprawled about and crowds of family members noisily drinking. The silence was definitely the most eerie thing about it. The place felt abandoned or something. I'm sure all of you have that one place, be it a house or a restaurant or something else, that gets really rowdy when your whole family spends time there together. Now try to picture that place empty and silent. Kind of spooky, right? Anyway, it was getting late, and I hate driving at night more than anything, so I texted my mom to let her know I'd just stay overnight and head back in the morning. She told me that was a good idea, and reminded me to thank Uncle Rick for letting me stay there, which I did. I made myself some food, messed around on my phone for a bit, and then started washing up for the night. Usually during family gatherings, I'd get jammed into one of the smaller rooms on the 3rd floor while other relatives got to claim the nicer, bigger rooms. I'm not complaining about the system at all, I'm just telling you how things tended to go. Since I had the house to myself that night though, I figured I'd take advantage of it. The master bedroom on the 2nd floor has a private bathroom, a massive walk-in closet, and a ridiculously comfortable bed. The decision wasn't exactly difficult. I knew that's where I'd be sleeping. I climbed in around midnight and quickly drifted off. I don't remember what time it was when I woke up, only that something startled me awake. I was still a little groggy, but I was dead sure sound had just come from the closet, like something had fallen in there. Without making any noise, I craned my head to look at the closet. Even that small action sent my heartbeat racing. My mind was awake, but my body refused to move, like some kind of sleep paralysis without the paralysis. I could move, I just didn't want to. I didn't want to find out if there was something in that closet. I squeezed my eyes shut and told myself to go back to sleep, and I almost did. But the literal second I started drifting back into sleep, I heard it. A muffled thump from inside the closet. I squinted my eyes just a smidge and tried convincing myself I'd imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. As if overcome by some invisible force, I laid there in complete paralysis with no control over my body whatsoever. Not like before, this time it was real. I couldn't move even if I wanted to. Until that moment, I didn't truly understand what it meant to be frozen in place. I listened in horror as the closet door slowly creaked open. Through barely open eyes, I watched as a dark figure stepped into the room. It just stood there beside the bed motionlessly, watching me. Maybe 20 seconds passed, each second feeling impossibly long. Then, silently, it turned and left the room. I stayed completely still, barely breathing. The footsteps moved across the floor, but instead of heading downstairs like I had expected them to, They actually creaked upstairs to the 3rd floor. My stomach churned. The only staircase led up. There was no exit from there. My mind was screaming at me to do something, but I was too afraid. I couldn't overpower a grown man. I had no idea if he was armed. The only thing I could do was wait. After a few painful moments in my own head, I worked up the courage to snap myself out of the paralysis. Quietly, I reached for my phone and dialed 911. As soon as the dispatcher picked up, I whispered as quietly as I could, telling them someone was in the house. I slipped out of bed and just as quietly turned the lock on the bedroom door. Then I waited. Minutes dragged painfully by until flashing red and blue lights illuminated the windows. I was actually kind of shocked at how quickly the police arrived. I ran down the stairs, threw open the front door, and nearly collapsed in relief when I saw the police. They didn't hesitate. They stormed inside, moving quickly through the house. I waited outside. It didn't take them long. According to them, the house was empty. I was in disbelief. I had heard the footsteps go up, and there was nowhere to go after that, so he must have still been in the house. There was no other explanation. The police insisted he must have slipped past me, that I was too freaked out to notice. I knew that wasn't true, but what could I say? The guy had vanished. I wasn't comfortable letting the police just leave though, so I called Rick. Rick wasn't having it. He snapped at the police and told them to check again, and that my life might have depended on it. So they did. They searched again, more thoroughly this time. Rick told me to follow them and watch what they were doing, and so I did. The officers moved methodically, opening every closet and checking under beds, tapping at the walls like they were expecting something hidden behind them. They pulled back the shower curtain in every bathroom, double-checked the locks on the doors and the windows, and that's when they found it. One of the bedroom windows on the 3rd floor, the room I should have been sleeping in, was unlocked. One of them stood by the door, while the other one went downstairs and stepped onto the back deck. I opted to go outside with the 2nd officer, mostly because the thought of being locked in the house with some stranger sickened me. The officer shined his light around the property, but there was nothing out there. He started scanning the roof, and to my horror, his beam swept across something terrifying. It was him. It was that stranger that had been in the house. He was just sitting there on the roof. He was this disgusting-looking bald man in tattered clothing who looked like he hadn't seen a shower in years. The next hour was a blur. The cops communicated with each other, and they got the guy off the roof in cuffs. The police said he was probably homeless and squatting in the house for days, maybe longer. But when they asked him how he got in, how long he'd been there, and why he was hiding in the closet, he didn't answer. He just kept that eerie, vacant look, like none of it mattered to him. He was in the back of one of their police cars shortly after that, and that was that. The whole thing was so crazy that it's still hard to wrap my head around. As much as I try, I cannot figure out why that guy had been hiding in that closet of all places. Maybe he heard me enter the house and hid in the first place he thought of. I still don't know how he got into the house. Rick doesn't either. It's impossible to get to the roof from the ground, so I feel like that explanation is pretty illogical. The rest of my extended family has been insisting that Rick ups his home security, but he's refused every time for reasons I can't explain. The thought that had I been sleeping in my assigned bedroom, that night might have ended very differently. My buddy Mike has a beach house on the Jersey Shore. Calling it a beautiful property would be an understatement. It's magnificent, or at least, as someone who never came from much, that's what it feels like to me. I obviously don't know the history too well. It's not my family's house after all. But from what I do know, that house has been in their family for generations. Mike's grandparents had been trying to use it as their permanent place of residence for the longest time, but unfortunately, they recently passed away. Without anyone living there anymore, the house is dormant most of the time since most of Mike's extended family lives on the West Coast, and his parents are too busy to make good use out of it. The upside to an otherwise sad situation, though, is that Mike is essentially allowed free access to it whenever he wants. I'm pretty sure it was Mike's dad's intention to rent the house out to try and make some extra cash, but as far as I know, the gears aren't exactly turning on that one. It's not exactly an easy task to find someone willing to rent out a beach house during the off-season, so you can't really blame the guy. It was sometime in mid-July when Mike hit me up and asked me if I wanted to come down for the weekend. He didn't have to twist my arm. I had nothing going on, and the thought of kicking back at a beach house, especially one that was nice, was an easy yes. His plan was simple. We'd hang out, maybe hit the beach during the day, then head to the boardwalk at night and just enjoy the shore for what it was. It wasn't some crazy party weekend or anything like that, just a chill escape from the usual, and honestly, I was looking forward to it. Mike and I lived pretty close together, so he was going to pick me up and drive me down with him. That Friday, I packed a duffel, threw it in his trunk, and the two of us made the drive down. The first night was chill. We got in sometime around 6, dropped our stuff off in the upstairs bedrooms, and settled in. The house has that cozy, slightly musty beach house smell, like a mix of salt air and old wood. Not in a bad way, more like history. You could tell it's seen decades of family summers. After grabbing a quick bite from a sub shop nearby, we decided to walk the beach for a bit, just to take in the evening. Mike brought a couple rods with him, so we figured we'd try our luck fishing for a while. It wasn't really about catching anything though, it was more about being out there. At one point, we stumbled across a pair of girls about our age. They were walking barefoot along the shoreline, and Mike, being Mike, struck up conversation right away. They were local, or at least semi-local, and it turned into one of those low-stakes, slightly flirtatious interactions that happen naturally when you're young and on the beach at night. We got their numbers, and they continued their walk while we continued fishing. There were still a good number of people around since it was peak season, but Mike knew all the quiet pockets. Private beach access, tucked away paths through dunes, little spots between houses where the lights didn't reach. We ended up finding a nice stretch to ourselves where the only sound was the water and the wind. It was the kind of night that made you forget about real life for a bit. The next morning, we woke up around 9 and decided to go for a run along the boardwalk. It was already warm out by then, but there was a breeze coming off the ocean that made it bearable. We weren't doing anything crazy, just a couple miles to get the blood flowing. Mike's a pretty active guy, and I've been trying to stay in shape, so it felt good to move after a night of lounging around. The rest of the day kind of slipped by without us noticing. Later that evening, Mike floated the idea of hitting a few bars in Seaside, but we were both wiped. Even though the idea sounded fun in theory, the thought of waiting in line and yelling over music didn't really line up with how our bodies felt after a full day in the sun. We ended up crashing kind of early instead. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a shrill, piercing beeping. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, but after a second or two of lying there in the dark, I realized it was real. It sounded like a smoke detector, one of those sharp, high-pitched alarms that cut straight through your skull. I threw myself out of bed and started scanning my surroundings in an effort to pinpoint where the beeping was coming from. It didn't sound like it was coming from my bedroom or anywhere else on the second floor. After focusing for a few more seconds, I got the impression that it was actually coming from above me. Without thinking, I yanked the bedroom door open and made a beeline for Mike's room. With both hands, I jolted him awake and told him to follow me. He immediately caught on to the situation and hurried after me, not even bothering to put a shirt on. As if our lives depended on it, the two of us bolted up the stairs, completely unsure of what we'd be running into. The third floor was mostly dark, except for a little bit of moonlight leaking in through the window at the end of the hallway. We flipped the lights on and started scanning the space, still expecting to see or smell something burning. But there was nothing. No smoke, no flickering lights, no signs of a fire at all, actually. It was baffling. Eventually, after some painfully irritating minutes of searching for the source of that god-awful noise, I found something. In one of the bedrooms, tucked neatly under a pillow, was a small black device. Before calling Mike into the room, I decided to examine it myself a little, mostly out of pure confusion. It was the size of a walkie-talkie, all black with the exception of a blinking red light on top. That was it. No buttons, no stickers, no screen, just a smooth jet black casing, that blinking light, and a single switch on the side. Or at least what looked like a switch. I flipped it off, and the beeping stopped immediately. Mike entered the room at the same time. His eyes flicked from the bed, to me, to the device in my hand. Neither of us said anything at first. We locked eyes, and I could tell he was just as confused and just as scared as I was. After a few more seconds of silence, he asked me if I had ever seen that black thing before. I said no and asked him the same, to which he also said no. For the next hour, we tried figuring out what that thing was, how it had gotten there, and what had triggered it, but no answer we came up with was satisfying. Mike swore none of his family members had been in that house in ages, and I believed him. I mean, why would he lie about that? Plus, who the hell would put that thing in their own home? You might think it was for safety or something, or maybe a substitute for a faulty upstairs smoke detector, but again, there was no fire, so it hadn't even prevented any emergencies. And then the matter of how it had gotten triggered in the first place, that was the scariest part about the whole thing. We were sitting in Mike's room in the dark when I had a crazy thought. I couldn't believe it hadn't occurred to me until then. The switch. I pulled out the device and very quickly flipped the switch on and off, and you guessed it, the shrill beeping started up again and stopped as soon as I flipped it off. Both of us froze, and Mike whispered, "Oh my God." The thought hit us both at the same time. The only way to operate the device was by hand. Someone else was in the house. We didn't waste any time. Mike dialed the police while I locked the door, barricading it as best I could. We waited for what felt like forever, and finally, the police showed up. We quickly made our way downstairs to intercept them. After giving them a very brief description of what was going on, they did a full sweep of the house while we waited outside by the front door per their instruction. When they finally came back downstairs, what they told us was horrifying. Apparently, every single window on the third floor was wide open, even the bathroom windows. And it wasn't just that. The beds were flipped, drawers were pulled out of dressers, and everything was on the floor. The room where I had found the device looked completely ransacked, even though it was nice and neat when we searched up there. I felt like I was losing my mind, and so did Mike. But after being escorted upstairs by the officers, we had no choice but to accept the reality. The officers didn't find much else. No one hiding, no prints, no weapons. After another 20 minutes or so, they told us to make sure all the windows were locked and secured from now on, and to call again if anything else happened. Then they just left. Mike and I didn't feel safe being in that house after someone probably crazy or on drugs, had messed with us like that, in such an unexplainable way too. But we had no choice. We told ourselves we'd sleep there the rest of the night and leave early in the morning, and that's what we did. Luckily, whoever had been in the house must have left, because nothing else happened throughout the night. There are still parts of this night I can't explain, and I can only imagine what Mike must be feeling. For all we know, whoever had been in that house that night might have never left. This happened a decent while ago, back when I was 22. Enough years passed to the point where I feel safe talking about it. I was fresh out of college with a desirable job and minimal expenses since I was living in my childhood home with my parents. Imagine that, racking up considerable savings without having to worry about food or a place to sleep, and all the while having full access to the room I grew up in, my car, and all my hometown comforts. It's safe to say I was living in pure bliss. Believe me, I knew how lucky I was to have parents who allowed me to stay at home and rent-free. I know a lot of people don't have that option, so it's something I never took for granted, but not everything was as stress-free as you might think. What I'm about to tell you happened not even 1 month into my time back at home. I've never been what people my age like to call a party girl. I don't drink excessive amounts of alcohol, I don't spend every ounce of my free time at clubs, and I definitely don't allow men to dictate my life in any way. That's just how I was raised. My father is the most important man in my life, and hookup culture disgusts me. Because of all that, my life is pretty routine. Wake up, satisfy my caffeine addiction, go to work, go to the gym, read a bit of my book at home, mess around on my phone, and go to sleep. Weekends are for hiking, mini road trips, board games, and whatever else I decide I want to spend my time doing. But one random weekend, my closest friend from college, Lindsay, invited me and our other 2 friends, Sabrina and Thea, to spend a few days at her family's beach house. I'd never been, but from the way Lindsay talked about it, the place sounded like a dream. Quiet, tucked away from the touristy chaos on its own private beach, and just a short walk from the water. To put it bluntly, Lindsay's family is loaded. I think both her parents were neurosurgeons, so I had a feeling her beach house would be insane, and I was far from disappointed. When I first laid eyes on it, I was awestruck. Look, I'm no architect, but I know a modern style house when I see one, and Lindsay's must have been ultra modern because it looked more like a covert military safe house than a personal home. I'd love to show you guys pictures of it, believe me, I've got plenty, but out of respect for Lindsay's family, I think that would be in really poor taste, even if what I'm about to tell you didn't happen. The four of us unloaded our stuff and decided where we'd be sleeping. Lindsay obviously had enough individual bedrooms for all of us to occupy, but what would be the fun in that? Instead, the four of us stayed in the same room, one of the kids' bedrooms that had 2 sets of bunk beds and its own attached bathroom. We'd been staying there 3 nights, which, in my opinion, is the perfect amount of time to spend coupled up with anyone other than your family. I tend to be relatively irritable, so anyone who's not clean or polite tends to tick me off pretty easily. Not that any of my friends are, but you know how it is. I know I told you about my relatively boring lifestyle already, but if there was a time to drink, it was that weekend with my friends, so I definitely planned on letting loose a little more than I ordinarily would. We wanted to keep the first night pretty chill though, so we walked down to the private beach connected to the house and sat in the sand, stargazing. The four of us were drinking White Claws and listening to house music on Sabrina's speaker when we noticed something in the distance. It was this faint, flickering light emanating from somewhere further down the shore. The four of us quieted down a bit and watched the light flicker on and off. The sight was kind of hypnotic, as eerie as it was. After a while, it became clear that the light was swinging back and forth, like a handheld flashlight someone was walking with. And soon after, we realized that's just what it was. It looked like 3 or 4 people casually walking in our direction, not running or stumbling or moving strangely, but strolling at a leisurely pace. As they got closer, we started hearing the sound of laughter, which caused all of us to relax a bit. Considering how late it was most likely just a group of teenagers or even people our age. They must have noticed us because at some point, one of them yelled out hi in a friendly voice. It was a guy's voice, and he sounded around our age. Thea yelled back, and we made some small talk while they made their way over to us. As they approached, we could see that it was a group of 3 guys who looked maybe a year or 2 older than we were. They all had that typical beach boy look, which I could tell right away my friends were digging, especially Thea. She's a bit crazy when it comes to guys, so I can't say I was too surprised. She knows how I feel about her lifestyle, so it's not like I'm saying anything crazy. To be fair, she is drop-dead gorgeous, and I've never seen a guy not take a liking to her. The guys sat down with their beers, and the 7 of us continued drinking. It was actually a really great time. The guys weren't overtly flirtatious, but they weren't boring either. Fast forward an hour and several drinks later, and they ultimately invited us back to their place. Personally, I was exhausted and was leaning towards going to sleep, but I could tell all 3 of my friends wanted to continue hanging out with the boys, especially Thea, of course. I decided not to spoil everyone's fun and called it a night for myself, telling my friends to go on without me. There were only 3 guys after all, and I had no intention of hooking up with anyone that night. I walked back towards Lindsay's house while the 6 of them walked along the beach, presumably towards wherever the guys were staying. I washed up and went to bed. Sometime after 3 in the morning, I woke up to a FaceTime call from Lindsay, which was confusing since she should have either been home by then or asleep next to one of the guys. I answered her in a groggy voice, and what she said woke me up instantly. She basically screamed into the phone that Thea and Sabrina had been kidnapped and I needed to get her car immediately. Her words were like a bucket of ice-cold water being splashed across my face. I've never felt a more intense sense of fear and adrenaline. I didn't waste a second. My hands were literally shaking as I quickly threw on some clothes and sprinted down the stairs. I asked her why she had called me instead of the police, and she reassured me that she already had. She told me to stay on the line as she walked me through it. With her instruction, I managed to open the driveway gate, find her car keys, and speed out of there in a matter of minutes. She told me they were about 10 houses down the beach to the left, so that's where I started driving. She described the car and told me what direction it had gone in, and I slammed on the gas to try and catch up. There wasn't a single car on the road, and I was driving at an insanely unsafe speed. It was a miracle I didn't get pulled over. After a few minutes of driving, I noticed a car matching Lindsay's description driving slowly in the distance. Then I hung up the phone, called the police, and told them exactly where we were. The dispatcher told me to keep my distance so as not to alert them to the situation, so that's what I did. After what felt like forever, I spotted cop lights up ahead. The car ahead of me didn't try to evade the police. I can only imagine that they assumed it was an unrelated stop. I pulled the car over and watched everything unfold. It was pure chaos. The cops forcibly removed all 3 men from the SUV at gunpoint. They put them in cuffs and escorted them back to one of the cruisers. Then, one of the officers walked over to the trunk of the car and pulled it open to reveal both Thea and Sabrina, bound and, from the looks of it, pretty badly bruised. As horrifying as the whole experience was, it was nothing compared to the sequence of events told from their perspective. All 3 of them were comfortable with me writing this, by the way. We're still close in contact, so I obviously asked them. But none of them wanted to write it themselves, and for good reason. To keep things short, after I went to bed, they all continued drinking. Lindsay is the only one who remembers things clearly, since she was trying to be at least a little responsible given it was her family's house we were staying in. At some point, the guys Thea and Sabrina were with suggested they all go to bed. So the 4 of them split off while Lindsay told the 3rd guy she was going home. He was really upset about that, which Lindsay initially thought was because he wanted to get with her. She told him she would have been down but had to watch her house, and he got angry. They yelled at each other for a bit, and he ended up telling Lindsay to get the hell out of his house and never come back, which she was more than happy doing. Halfway home though, she realized she had forgotten her purse, so she went back to get it. That's when she saw the guys throwing Thea and Sabrina into the back of the car before driving off. She called the police, then me, and that was that. Thea's parents are both lawyers, and they jumped through dozens of hoops to do 2 things: keep the event as far away from the public sphere as possible, and make sure those guys got maximum prison sentences. They accomplished both. Turns out the house they were staying in didn't even belong to them. It was owned by some random old couple who were on vacation in a different country. That, plus the slew of other crimes they were charged with, put them away for a long time. Although I still think there's no sentence long enough that can properly compensate for what they did. As much as I hate admitting it, this traumatized me for years. I couldn't do beaches, late nights, or talking to strangers, no matter how harmless they seemed, or how safe a situation felt. I became antisocial and drifted away from the girls for a little, but luckily that's since changed. I can't even begin to imagine how this incident affected Thea and Sabrina. Part of me feels like not remembering anything is a blessing in disguise. I think the craziest part about the whole thing is the fact that had I not gone home, I might not have been able to reach Lindsay's car in time. And had it not been for that, the police may have never found those guys' car.